Who you come to me? All the dead Madonnas will diminishing returns. Once against the ball, I'll say, on some spoilers, the Godfather, and the Godfather Part 2, and the Godfather Part 3. Enjoy.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Diminishing Returns. We're going to take on an all-time classic trilogy this week. In fact, possibly one of the most famous trilogies ever, perhaps. Certainly one of the most well-reputed films to start off with. It is, of course, The Godfather. And with me here to discuss it, we have Sol.
Hello.
And Calvin.
Hello.
Now, let's just preface what we're going to deal with here. We're going to go through the whole trilogy. As usual, and then we'll do our own pictures. But I suspect, based on little bits of conversation we've had, that none of us are really big fans of The Godfather, and I think this is going to end up being a controversial episode because of that. So, shall we just throw that up front right away?
Yeah, this was your choice to do these films. So why did you subject us to that? You. Because I'd already watched these. I'd already put the effort in as a film student. I'd already sat through all 6 hours of this or whatever it is. 9
6 hours? That's
9
generous.
hours.
Yeah, it's close to 9.
Even
yeah.
9 is generous.
10 maybe. Yeah, I'd already endured this. So why did you feel the need to subject me to it again, Alan?
Well, we do have a duty of responsibility to the listener. And when I say listener, I mean listeners.
So I must say, this is, along with next week's episode, weirdly enough, this is one of the big fan requests we've been getting since we launched the show. I think we've had quite a few people actually just ask about us doing this one.
I mean, you can't deny just how big the film is and its reputation. So obviously it has been one of those that's been requested. But
I don't really get that. Why would people want... Because people want us to talk about it, presumably because they think, oh, we're going to fawn over it and say lovely things like almost everyone does. And where's the interesting, discussion in that?
Well, I don't know. We usually have a better discussions if we have differing opinions. So let's see how it goes. Yes. We'll just slag it off. but I think. Well, before I get into that, actually, the reason I chose it because obviously it's a classic of Hollywood cinema, so I think it's a good one for us to do. I think there's going to be a nice discussion about it. But also, it was a good excuse for me to watch them again because I haven't watched them for years, and my memory of it was. That wasn't as good as everyone seems to make it out. So I thought I'll give it a chance to watch it again. And I can't say my opinion's particularly changed. I don't think it's a bad film at all, but all of them, I don't think they're bad films. But I don't really understand why they're so highly rated.
I'll skew more negative than you, Alan, then, because I don't think the first one... Should we compartmentalize this into the 3 distinct parts?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
okay.
Let's do that. Yeah.
So looking at the first one, it's generally regarded as the greatest film of all time, unless you're talking to someone who thinks that's The Shawshank Redemption.
Or Citizen Kane.
But it's one of the big heavy hitters. Generally tops these sorts of BFI and American Film Institute lists and what have you.
It's number 2 on the AFI list. I know that for sure.
And I believe it's number 2 on IMDb ever since the coup around The Dark Knight in 2008. Are you aware of this?
What's number 1 on IMDb at the moment?
Shawshank, I believe. It used to be the other way round. But then The Dark Knight came out, went to number 1 on their top 250. All the Batman fanboys went crazy, making accounts and voting it up. And then all of the Shawshank Redemption fans were like, now's our chance, now, get him. And they all logged in, voted The Godfather at 1 out of 10, Shawshank 10 out of 10. And there was this really weird thing going on the message boards where they basically seized the top spot in the chaos, and they're still there now. So yeah, that shows how much meaning you can put into these lists, I suppose.
How could anyone care that much?
It's odd, isn't it?
I like the IMDb ratings. It gives you a good impression of how a film is kind of generally accepted out there in the world, and it's interesting to see how that correlates with your own opinions. But to take any sense of pride in that for a film you're not I don't really get that.
This is the thing, like, if anyone was going to care about meaningless statistical
it would be you.
lists and ratings, it would be me. And I don't give a shit if what's at number one. Like, come on. Anyway, my point is,
of course, you can go to dimreturns.com to see our top-rated films. No shenanigans there.
I mean, yeah. I think Moana's technically our top-rated film of all time.
It's I think it's Alien at the moment.
Oh,
which is quite well deserved, I think, out of all the
yeah.
ones we've covered.
Yeah.
But yeah, I what I was building to is this is generally regarded, depending on who you ask, as one of, if not the greatest films ever made.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then I don't know about you guys, but I clearly don't understand cinema, so we should call this podcast quits.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you to an extent. I don't know, like, just last night, actually, I finished watching part 3 and I tweeted about it just to sort of see what kind of reaction I would get. I just said, along the lines of, just finished watching all 3 Godfathers. I appreciate they're very well acted and very well shot, but by God, are they boring. And sure enough, a lot of the reaction was, a lot of the negative reaction to that tweet was from people who were sort of saying, oh, well, come back to it in a few years, or, when you grow up, you'll watch it. I'm nearly 28. That annoys me that there's no good discussion that comes from saying you don't like The Godfather. It's just people automatically write you off and say...
Until now.
No, until now, yes, quite.
Well, can I immediately launch a slight defence here?
Okay.
In that I think that we are very much missing something with the fact that we're watching it 40, 45 years later. Like, put this into its time, and it was really the crest of a wave of the new Hollywood, of this new artistic, really genuine creative filmmaking that was coming off the back of the 60s, like where it was very commercial, like the golden age before that, which was really commercial. This, and it comes along with, like, Easy Rider, Midnight Cowboy, The Conversation, even like that kind of Chinatown, all this stuff, French Connection, all this much sort of better cinema. There was a huge European influence coming in. And this, I think, was kind of the culmination of that, with a story that everybody knew, because it was a very famous novel that had really sold well. I think at the time, it was in this huge bubble. And for some reason, that has not popped, and it's lasted. But I think for us, as a different generation coming into it, we don't quite see how different it was and how good it was at the time.
I don't know about that. I can still put on my context hat, and like I can watch something like Citizen Kane, which I think is a brilliant film and entertaining.
I genuinely find Citizen Kane thoroughly entertaining, even by modern standards. But I can watch something like Easy Rider that you just listed, Alan. Many of the films you just listed I can watch, and I do have to apply a degree of context to get them, but I can certainly appreciate where they're coming from. And there's nothing about what I will say is, firstly, this is not an experience of mine that's been unique to the Godfather films. This is something I have across the board with Francis Ford Coppola. So I do wonder if I just don't get him.
This is something I wanted to bring up. The most overrated director of all time, Francis Ford Coppola. Yeah. His reputation really is based on Apocalypse Now and the Godfather films. Let's face it, that's what he really sells it on. And all those films are overrated and also were famously completely chaotic, and he had no control over what was happening.
Yeah. So... Hearts of Darkness, the making of documentary about Apocalypse Now, is a vastly superior film to Apocalypse Now.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. How come? I've never seen Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now is shit, and I maybe we'll do an episode on it at one point. But like, I can fight that corner very well. I can tell you why that film is a fucking state, doesn't do the book justice, doesn't work on any thematic level. It is bullshit. And I don't know what people see in it, other than maybe 2 or 3 scenes are quite good. The Godfather's similar, but not as bad. Not as strikingly, obviously bad. Dracula, his Dracula film is appalling.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. I didn't care for it.
And the only film left on his filmography that I've seen that is by default the best film of his that I know is Peggy Sue Got Married, which is a passable rom-com kind of thing. I don't think very much of him at all.
It's part of his style, like, he's one of the few filmmakers I know where he's very adamant about adapting source material, which is why, like, above The Godfather, it's, whatever his name is, Mario Puzo's The Godfather, it's Bram Stoker's Dracula, and I don't know how much I agree with that. Like, his argument is that, the artist is the author, the true, creator of the thing, so we must represent his vision on screen. I don't know if that's a healthy way of adapting source material.
With Bram Stoker's Dracula, I always just assumed that was their method of making a distinction between it and the Universal horror Dracula, the Hammer horror Dracula. It was their way of marking it out as its own thing. But you might be right, it might have just been down to him. I mean, what I will say is Apocalypse Now is based on a book, and I don't think it's generally marketed with the author's name anywhere.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And he shat all over the source material in a lot of ways. I think it's more Marlon Brando's fault than anything, but he certainly let Marlon Brando.
Apocalypse Now is famous. It was just a chaotic, cocaine-fueled, heart attack inducing 18-month shoot of nonsense. So, I mean...
A lot of Marlon Brando's films have been like that, actually. The Island of Dr. Moreau that we were talking about before we started recording is another very similar story with just chaos and things going over budget and over schedule. But Apocalypse Now was in a state before Marlon Brando even arrived on set. I don't think he turned up till, they'd been filming for months. So,
God.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
Anyway, The Godfather.
Coppola shit. And I mean, his career has borne that out, He has...
He's been doing, experimental films in Romania or something, hasn't he?
See if you agree with me, but I would say, basically, the film's greatest asset is its acting.
Yes.
Almost... almost
I don't know
without
about that with the
fault,
first one.
really. But the acting is excellent, right?
Yeah,
I don't know. One of my big complaints with the first film and reasons I don't get it is much like Francis Ford Coppola, I don't understand the appeal of Marlon Brando. I think he's shit. I haven't seen. I'm yet to see a good performance from him, and I'll concede I haven't seen A Streetcar Named Desire.
Have you mainly seen his work when he's the size of a house?
Yes.
And, right, okay.
And couldn't be asked to learn the lines and was literally reading them off the body of the actors in the scenes, which was going on in The Godfather.
Oh no way! Really?
Yeah, and I think this film is every bit as lazy a performance as he's ever given anywhere. There's nothing about his performance here that's any better than it is in The Island of Dr. Moreau or Superman. He's wandered onto set for obscene amounts of money for very little work. He's mumbling his way through scenes. I mean, what I'll say is there's nothing wrong with his performance here, but the idea that this is some incredible performance that's meant to be up there with the all-time greats is ridiculous. And like I say, he literally is reading lines off of the body of actors in scenes. There's several scenes where actors are stood really awkwardly because they have got pieces of paper taped to their chest, and you can watch his eyes darting back and forth as he reads them.
If that's not a criteria for best actor Oscar, I don't know what is. Which he won for it. Best actor, not even best supporting. James Caan, Robert Duvall, and Al Pacino were all nominated in the best supporting actor category that year. I mean, that's insane.
Well, Al Pacino was not happy about that, that he was for supporting. And it doesn't make sense.
I'm not surprised.
For the film, that is just the bullshit we Academy Award nonsense, let's put him into this one, let's put him into this one. It's the same with, William H. Macy and Fargo, for example. Like that. But it's just nonsense, because this is very much Michael Corleone's story, the whole trilogy is. But in defense of Brando, this is kind of where that started, that what your real kind of classic Brando, old Brando. And so when he did it in this, it was embodying a character and bringing something to that. And then he just went like, oh, I can get away with doing this now. Just fuck it.
And it carried on in everything he did. Like, I'm sure we will do The Island of Dr. Moreau at some point because it's
I hope so.
hilariously fascinating, and his antics, well, they certainly didn't help the film. I'm not going to blame it squarely on him ruining it, but
Val Kilmer had a lot of blame.
Yeah,
there's a lot of blame too.
But even in Superman, where he had like 10 lines, he was reading them off the baby. And I'm not joking. There was literally a piece of paper stuck to the baby in the scene where he picks it up as he's talking.
I can't blame him. If I had the sway that he had, I'd probably do that.
But I can blame him because the man had made enough money. At this point into your career, you should either be doing it for the sake of other people, like helping their career, people enjoying it, or you want to make legitimate art. If you're just turning up to cash in an obscene paycheck for 2 minutes work, and like, fair enough if you do that once or twice, fair enough if you take the Samuel L. Jackson approach of one for you, one for me, but if that is what your career becomes, and that is all you become, then no, I'm sorry, that's pathetic. Like, why would you do that to yourself? It's stupid. At least look like you're having fun whilst you're doing it, if that's what you're doing.
Oh, come on, he's having so much fun. I was about to lead on to the fact that he's hilarious here. I think he's really funny all throughout. Like, his death scene is hilarious. I thought it was a really good comedic performance.
Is it meant to be a comedic performance?
I took it as such. I thought it was just funny that this doddery old man who's like mumbling his way, you can't understand a word he says, and he looks befuddled most of the time, and he's the head of this huge, important crime family. I thought that was
I agree
funny.
with you that I find it funny, but, and I might be wrong here, maybe this is where I've been going wrong all these years, I'm fairly sure this is meant as a deadly serious film.
Oh.
Alan?
Well, you'd think it's a comedy.
Well, no, I don't think it's a comedy, but I think that character is intended as, comedic.
I'll go so far as to say I think there's an element of very dark comedy about his death that's perhaps intentional, but that's it. I don't think there's any real... I think his performance is meant to be menacing more than anything.
I think, yeah, for the most part, yeah.
Menacing?
Yeah, it's supposed to
I
be
think
kind
that's
of
how it's intended.
coldly quiet and chilling.
Yeah.
And like we see...
Maybe I've just seen too many parodies, because obviously that performance is the go-to gangster parody, isn't it? But...
Yeah, and I agree, like, I find him funny in this film, but I don't think he's meant to be remotely funny. I don't think that was intentional.
He was my second favourite thing in the film. Like, there wasn't enough of my favourite things.
I mean, I'll agree with that. Yeah, like, the scenes with him are by far... I mean, what I was leading to before, actually, is... And this is true of this series, really. Whilst I think on the whole, this is a really boring film, and there's not enough about it that works, there are a handful of scenes, individual moments, that are wonderful. And I kind of wish... someone else had edited the film even, like, just to kind of play up those moments. Because, as you say, the scene where Marlon Brando's Godfather puts some orange peel in his mouth and then dies is a great little scene. I don't know, you have to sit through 2 hours of, like, family politics and...
While we're talking about the cast, just in broad terms, could we talk a little bit about Diane Keaton? Because she's the one who really stands out to me from this cast as like, what are you doing here? But I guess she wasn't the Diane Keaton she became at this point, was she?
Yeah, I agree. She does just seem a bit out of place in that world, and she, that's not to take away from her at all, because she does give a very good performance.
The character is supposed to be out of place in that world as well, though. That's kind of the point.
But I think that's a retroactive view of it, because at this time she hadn't done much, had she? She hadn't done Manhattan. She hadn't done Annie Hall. Crucially, I will say, broadly over the course of the series, it's the Diane Keaton Al Pacino scenes that are my favourite thing. Like, the whole relationship between Michael and Kay is the thing that really hooks me into the whole trilogy, and but there's hardly anything of it in the films until maybe the third one.
Yeah, their scenes are generally some of the standout moments I'm referring to, actually.
I think it feels the most human, and especially in the second and third film, I really like the Michael's sister, Connie. There's something more human when the women are involved in scenes, because when it's the men and they're doing all the bullshit big ball talk and talking about who they're going to go and kill and business and stuff, and it just all washes over me, because they're talking about people that I haven't seen yet, they've not been introduced on camera, they're talking about the businesses, I'm not interested. When the women are on screen, it feels a bit more human and grounded.
I'm going to dig into my notes here. I've deleted a couple that we've already covered. So number one, I've got pretty good theme tune. The music's actually really quite good for all the complaining I've been doing so far.
See, I was really annoyed by it in the first film. By the third film, I came to love it. I think I like, not the main theme, but the waltz, that it uses the same melody and generally plays during weddings. I think I hate it because I went on holiday to Sicily last year, and there was this annoying little boy who went around with this accordion
throwing oranges
playing.
at you.
No, he kept playing the Godfather theme all the time. Like, every night we went out in this, like, small little town to a restaurant. And
so it's definitely for the tourists.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's for the tourists. Like, he'd come up and, like, hold his hand out for money afterwards. Bearing in mind, I'm there with two of my mates, and he comes up and starts, like, serenading us with this Godfather theme, and it's like, go away, boy.
So yeah, then my next note is can't hear anything mumble, mumble, mumble. But I think we've sort of covered that.
It's really bad, isn't it? It's like, what the...
It's not just like... Marlon Brando as well. It's a lot of them.
Oh, it's mainly him.
It's like, mainly him.
On the documentaries on the DVD, they were talking about, like, all these filmmakers were saying, like, oh, Francis's vision was perfect, and there were all these studio bosses that were complaining about no one can hear Marlon Brando, he's mumbling and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, he is. The studio executives are right. You should have redubbed him with someone else, or just not cast him at all, which was the studio executive advice.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And now more praise. See, I'm being quite positive here because this is the start of the film. I'm going in with an open mind at this point. I haven't decided that I was right the first time. So, lovely colour palette.
Yeah, it's the wedding that the film starts. Each film seems to start with a wedding and end in a massacre. That is how each film is bookmarked. And the weddings are, I guess, it's a good device to introduce you to lots of characters. Because there are so many people in this family, and it's good to see... Like, I did have to Google the family tree every now and then to see who was who, especially in this first film.
As much as I hate weddings in real life, I really like a wedding as a plot device. I've come to realise recently. And
okay, so cinematography then, it was very innovative and it's very dark. For my money, it goes a little bit too dark for my taste because it kind of everything's lit directly from above. It does give the film a style. It gives it a look, and it kind of got a sepia look. In the second one, they just do it sepia in the 1900s section, 1919 or whatever it is.
In fact, the look of the film, we've referred to oranges a few times already in this record, actually, but for those who don't know, there's a running motif in the film, allegedly. I think I've heard conflicting information as to whether or not it's intentional, but whereby whenever an orange appears on screen, it's a signifier of impending death, and that certainly does stand true for much of the franchise.
There's just a lot of oranges, though, that's all.
But that's it. One of the things I've read is that they were just putting oranges in scenes whenever they could to brighten them up, because it was one of the few methods they had of putting some colour into the shot. So it just kind of coincidentally happens that you end up with a load of oranges in frame when people are dying, or about to die, rather.
I mean, let's say it's true and they did it deliberately. It still means nothing. There's no thematic reason to it, so it's still a pointless bit of information, even if it's true.
So now he has to grant wishes on his daughter's wedding day. So this is the big famous thing.
He's not granting wishes like a genie, he's just he's doing favours.
How disappointing would it be if you got the lamp thinking Robin Williams was going to come out and it was actually Marlon Brando? You can't remember the rules unless they're sort of like taped on a bit of paper onto your forehead or whatever. He's really lazy.
Oh man, that'd be like the ironic wishes are granted, but they're only ironic because he's too lazy to do like a good job of them. So like a little girl gets the lamp and wishes for a pony, and he just like tapes a mask to the dog and says, "Oh my god."
The pony, the dad's a pony.
Okay, so I'm still on board with the film at this point, because my next note is, this is fine so far.
Is this all the stuff where, like, everyone's coming for favours?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I would say favours other than wishes, but I do like the idea that he's granting wishes.
And now my next note is, starting to get bored of this wedding, get on with it, and then so slow. And that's it for the wedding. Have you got anything else to say?
No, except it introduces us to Michael. And now, okay, so the whole plot where I thought it was going to go is that Michael is the son of Vito Corleone, the Godfather, and he's like he's trying to be a good American citizen. He's come back from World War II, fighting in the army and stuff, and he does not want to go into the mafia business. He does not want to go into the family family business. So this sets it up to me as a fall from grace and sort of, being seduced by this underworld and all this darkness and whatnot. It doesn't really play out very much during the film, and I think we'll talk on later. I think we miss key moments where Michael's opinions change and his outlook changes. I don't think there is one definitive moment that we see on screen where it's like, click, he's not the Michael we were introduced to. Because he seems to go along into the mafia thing quite readily and without much coercion.
Well, if I can jump in there, because that kind of raises something that I thought that basically the structure of this film didn't work for me. That was my kind of main problem with it. And I got the impression that was because it was from a novel and they were kind of clumsily trying to break it down into something smaller. You know how these things happen. But I would say that this story is Michael Corleone going from like the kind of the innocent, I'm getting out of this family business, to being drawn in and having to be kind of morally corrupted. And that point is the end of the film. There is when he kills the Turk and Sterling Hayden, and that is the moment, and that's where you end the film, or maybe not literally there, but then you have the kind of the sort of fallout after that. And then the sequel would be him going from, now I'm in the business, to the head of the business, because his brother gets killed, so he has to step up. And then he has to make the ultimate sacrifice, which is kind of killing Tessio and killing his sister's husband, because they kind of turned against him. It's killing people who are close to you. That's the change from, okay, I've been corrupted, to pure cold-blooded killer, and now I'm the boss. That's two separate stories, and they buttered them together, put this whole Sicily thing in between, which was completely irrelevant, and you could take that out. You could take that out of the film as it is, and it wouldn't make any change to it. And in fact, if anything, it makes you think less of him as a character.
Well, structurally, if anything, I felt like I was watching an abridged miniseries. I felt like I was watching episodes of a TV show where the more episodic bits had been cut out.
Yeah.
And it was being stuck together. I think maybe the novel would work better as a TV show. I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking that when I watched it. And are you familiar of there was quite a famous mini-series edit of the first two Godfather films that I think it was called The Godfather, a novel for television or something like that. And it's basically the first two films re-edited into chronological order with some deleted scenes put back in.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I was struck watching it that I think it would fit that format much better.
Are you familiar with The Sopranos, which fits that format quite well?
Oh, I love The Sopranos.
So,
I love The
obviously,
Sopranos.
Well, my next note is that there is a comedy sound effect on the aeroplane landing after the wedding scene.
Is there?
What's that about?
I don't remember an aeroplane. I don't know what you're talking about.
There's a shot of an aeroplane landing, and there's a little when it lands on the ground, like a little cartoon skid.
That might just be bad Foley work. I don't know.
It's really weird.
This is the bit when Robert Duvall's character goes to visit the Hollywood producer,
right,
isn't it?
Yeah.
And this is the start of the whole famous horse's head sequence.
Make him an offer he can't
does it
refuse.
have much bearing on the rest of the film?
It's just to demonstrate their power, I guess, and their stretch of their influence.
Because it's a very long diversion just to sort of demonstrate what they're capable of doing.
And it doesn't even... I can think of worse things they could do than that.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, I get that some people like horses. I hate them. But,
So that's why you didn't like Crank.
this is the bit when Marlon Brando is like, he goes to get some fruit. I loved it. He goes over and he's like, yeah, give me some of that, yeah. And he goes over just like squeezing oranges, and then some guys come out of nowhere and shoot him in the back many times, but he still survives. He's like Michael Myers. I shot him 6 times.
Oh, I've got another note actually. They keep calling people Gumbas, which is really funny.
Do they?
Yeah.
Oh.
Throughout the film, they're like,
Didn't pick up on that.
they're like, "What are you doing, you Gumba?"
I didn't pick up on that either. But
I'll tell you a scene that I really liked. It comes shortly after this, where Marlon Brando's in hospital and Al Pacino comes up and he figures out that there's going to be another attempt made in his life, and he has to like move the bed around, and he's got the nurse with him, and there's some nice suspenseful moments in there with like footsteps coming up the hospital corridor and all that kind of stuff. That was really working for me.
yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's good.
Sorry, I'm reading his Gumba quotes. The one, oh god, there's the one where the guy just goes off on like a racial slur tirade about I don't care how many Dago Wop Guinea greaseball Gumbas come out of the woodwork.
Oh god.
Gumba. Is Gumba a racial slur then? I assume it is. Or does it just mean like you nincompoop?
It must be fairly tame if it's, you know. But yeah, I like the hospital scene as well. It was very suspenseful, and like you got that moment where they're waiting on the stairs, and there's this other guy with him, and we don't know who that is. Or like we kind of do, but he's not a character, and he's just shitting himself. And you're starting to think, is he going to be involved in this? What's going on? And then it's just sort of this very tense, if anything, slightly anticlimactic, but that kind of works because it sets up the next thing.
Because this is when Sterling Hayden's character comes into it, isn't it? The corrupt police captain.
And I did like that, you know, the guy punched him and then he like broke his jaw and he's like swollen up for the next 6 months. It's like, that's quite like a legit, like in films you don't usually get that, do you? Just sort of have a slight reddening.
I wondered how much time had passed because I was very confused by the bruise on Al Pacino's cheek for most of this, because I'm like, I thought a lot of time had passed. I don't know how long it takes a broken jaw to heal.
Even when he was in Sicily, he was still bruised, wasn't he?
So before Michael goes to Sicily, and I want to get on to talk about that bit specifically, the next sort of standout sequence is when he kills the police captain and another guy. Mm-hmm. How do we feel about that scene? That's like an often parodied, quite iconic sequence. Al Pacino's in the restaurant and he has to kill Sterling Hayden and the other guy, so he has to go into the bathroom and get the gun. And
that's quite a decent moment.
But yeah, again, I like that. And this is what I say, like, this is the scenes, like the hospital scene, that feel well directed because they're well paced.
Yes.
And because you don't know, is he going to do it? He fumbles around with the gun. He's like, and then I like how they keep reiterating to him, like, just shoot and drop the gun. And he doesn't. He walks out and then he goes, oh shit, I've got to get rid of the gun. Like all these little elements that kind of make it feel very real, very human, and you identify with this character who's made a major step in his life and like made this huge thing that he's done. But also, like, there's a sense of pride to it because he's avenging his father and all this sort of thing. It's I like that scene. I think it works really well, and it's put together very nicely. Yeah, so the whole Sicily section, I don't think it doesn't add anything to the story, right? Because ultimately, when he comes back, he hasn't changed in any kind of fundamental way. Even though something very dramatic happens to him there, it doesn't really change his character. So what we really need to see in that bit is what's happening elsewhere, which is essentially Sonny gets killed, and that's why he has to come back. Yes. So then we have this whole big section in Sicily where he's on a little walk, sees a girl, he's like, oh my god, I'm in love, let's get married, which annoyed me no end. Like the whole sort of love at first sight thing is just annoying anyway. But it makes his character seem superficial, weak, kind of simple, and then are we supposed to get some sense of great tragedy when she dies? Because it's almost like a relief, like he's suddenly not got this, he's not tied to Sicily anymore and he can go back kind of thing. Or I'm not sure what all that was about. I'm not sure what I was supposed to take from it. It made me like the character a lot less.
Especially because he left lovely Kay back in New York. It's not like they broke up. He just buggered off and left her there. And then he goes back to her later on. It's exactly. Like, well, never mind. There's another one waiting for me.
Yeah, but that scene would still work if he'd just gone to her and said, "Oh, hey, I'm back," and she's like, "Where have you been for 5 years?" And he's like, "Well, I had to disappear. I killed some people." Like that would still work in the sense of she's like, "Oh no, I'm not sure. I trust you. I don't want to take you back." Like the fact that he'd fall in love with someone else or whatever that was supposed to be didn't matter.
Is it the only thing that I could take away from it? And I'm sure there are people who've dissected this film frame by frame and understand what the meaning is behind everything. But about this whole sequence, the only thing that I kind of took away from it is that it's supposed to show that he can't escape it wherever he goes. Like, even if he thinks he can go and live a humble life in Sicily, it's going to catch up with him eventually. But even then, that doesn't really work out because Sicily, it's like, you're not going to escape the mafia
that's
in
the worst
Sicily,
place,
are you?
Plus, it's he's there to hide. He's just waiting until the dust blows over. He's not gone there to get away from the life. He's literally escorted by 2 bodyguards all time. Like that's not an escape. I don't think it's supposed to be. It's just a hiding place. I don't know. I'm not sure what it was supposed to show us.
So Marlon Brando dies.
Yeah,
which is hilarious.
Probably my favourite scene in the film.
It's so good when he puts the orange peel in his mouth and then he's like grrring at the kid, and the kid is like obviously very frightened. And at one point you can tell that Marlon Brando's like, "Oh no. And he's like trying to calm the kid down a little bit.
Yeah, the kid isn't acting at all. It's just I like
even like you can tell that it's being like, this is, the camera is zooming from quite far away to capture this. You do get the feeling that they were just left and then everyone else is like, 30, 40 meters away.
Yeah. Because even after Marlon Brando collapses and the kid just goes and squirts him with DDT. Yeah. It's just like... But I like that. It was a very natural thing a child would do. It felt really real and organic.
Yeah.
And so that was good.
Yeah. There are a lot of good, child... I hesitate to call actors, but the children are screaming in many family scenes, and women are like passing them around, and they all look really natural in it.
All those big wedding scenes and things, it did just feel like they set up a wedding and like, all right, there's a band playing, come and dance, and like just do whatever you want to do, and that seemed quite legitimate to me. It probably was.
What do you mean? You mean Coppola found like a tax break to like hold a wedding and write it off as a film expense?
Yeah, probably did.
That's what this has all been about.
I can see that. So James Caan's character is killed by the rival gangs because they've been sort of in warfare for a while now, and so that compels Al Pacino to come back because the next sort of son in line is a bit of a useless twat, and so it's going to fall to Michael to take over the family. And because he's kind of proved himself now that he's by killing people, he's sort of more respected in that sense. So he comes back. Marlon Brando sort of starts showing him the ropes, basically, doesn't he? Once Vito is sort of back up and on his feet, but he doesn't want to run the business, so he just sits there while Michael does it. Everyone who's talking to Michael just goes straight to him and goes, will you tell him he's not doing what we want? And he's like, Michael's the boss now. And then, so that's the passing of the torch, I guess. Yeah. Then he dies, and so there's nothing in the way. Like Michael is just the boss. Is that the end of the film, or does something else happen?
Pretty well. He massacres all the other family heads.
Yeah, well, the ones who had gone against them. They find out what work out what.
I really like the final scene of this film.
Me too.
Which is an Al Pacino, Diane Keaton moment, as we were talking about. I think
it makes me wish the whole film was about that.
Yeah, same. It's a really
beautiful...
strong moment.
Yeah, because she's like she's basically getting out of him like, you're not really going to go into this whole mafia thing, are you? And he's like, no, of course I'm not. And then he ends up going into the room at the end of the corridor, and it's obvious that people are asking him for deals and stuff, and they're kissing his hand and whatever, and the door slowly closes on her. I think the last shot is Diane Keaton's face with the door sort of closing, isn't it? Which I think is really powerful. Kind of probably would have been more powerful had that relationship been tracked a bit better throughout the film, and that whole conflict of her not wanting him to go into this line of work, and maybe expanding on the fact that he loves her and not marrying other people.
Is that so? I think we've covered the first film pretty well.
We ready to dive into To God, to Father.
Only 2 years after the first one was released, this one came out.
Godfather Part 2, well known as one of the greatest sequels ever made. My comment about the first film was that the structure wasn't very good. Well, this one, boy, it's a fucking mess, isn't it? The structure. I mean, it is literally two films that they've just smashed together with no regard for anything.
When I first saw this film, I rented it. I think after the length of the first film, I was very aware of, God, I'm in for a long movie. So I near the start, did the little thing where you change the timer on the DVD player from counting forward to counting down, just to see... I think just out of interest to see how long it actually was going to be. I think I saw like, oh, it's only like 2.5 hours. That's not so bad. And it was counting down, and I was thinking, you know what? I've enjoyed this one relatively well. It's certainly been a lot more enjoyable for me than the first film. I'm on board with this. It's told an alright story. Oh, this final scene, this is excellent. This brilliant ending to the film where De Niro kind of takes control of the you know, he kills this guy who's been harassing everyone.
Yes.
Brilliant. What a great end to the film. Then up comes Please Insert Disc 2. And I was absolutely fuming. I was so angry. And I swapped I think it was the same disc even, or maybe it was an actual second disc. I swap it round. I hadn't realised there was another disc that had been sent out. There's like another hour and a half. And it's like the film, I was content with that as the film. That could have been the ending, and I would have been perfectly happy with it. But they just keep going.
If you're going to take these two stories, intercut them with each other, first of all, you need to intercut them properly, not just do, here's a 40-minute chunk, here's a 40-minute chunk. Secondly, the stories have to complement each other in some way. But Vito's story is about him coming up. Vito's story is more akin to Michael's story in the first film, whereas Michael's already the boss, and it's more about it, and it's this whole thing about the Cuban Revolution that it's trying to tie it into. It's really bad. It's a bad film, and obviously there are great elements to it. The acting's still good, all this, but the structure of the film and the plot is bad.
I mean, the thing I'll say is I think this is far better than the first one.
I think I'd agree.
No.
For all the
I wouldn't.
faults, and I agree that structurally it is messier, but
yes.
the first film's not exactly got good structure anyway, so, you know, whatever. Whilst I'll agree with that, there are a hell of a lot of scenes in this film that I genuinely enjoy and do genuinely work, and it's kind of like wading through a sea of bland shit to get to these little nuggets. But straight off the bat, you replace Marlon Brando with Robert De Niro, so an actor who I think's shit and gives a lazy performance for a wonderful actor.
And then Marlon Brando.
I think Robert De Niro's a huge step up, and I like Al Pacino in this one. For whatever reason, I didn't get anything from him in the first film, but this feels like a proper Al Pacino performance to me. So the cast, I'm far more on board with, and the arc of, well, I guess De Niro for me. De Niro's story is the one that I'm most interested in here. The young rise of Corleone.
Well, De Niro's is the one that I follow. I don't really understand a lot of what's going on with Michael's story. It meanders and it goes off on weird tangents. And
it's about trade deals and things.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Star Wars Episode 1, whereas but Robert De Niro's story I can get behind. It's like, I get it. He has come over to this country and there's this guy in the neighborhood causing trouble for everyone. He's going to sort him out, and then he sort of slowly becomes that man.
And I love his scenes for the most part. I love the scene where he's asked to speak to that guy, the landlord who's raising the rent, and and he goes and has a word with him, and he just sort of says, like, you know, hey, you know, maybe you want to let the woman live there for the same rent, because maybe I'm a guy, if you speak to some people that you don't want to fuck around with, you're just saying maybe, and then the guy comes back and he's, you know, suddenly terrified after speaking to a few people, and it's just pitched really well, and it's what it upsets me, to be honest, because I see in this film, in the De Niro scenes, the potential for a Godfather film that I love, and I'm completely on board with, to the point that everyone else seems to love them, but it's just watered down with all this unnecessary stuff. And that's not to say there's nothing good in the Al Pacino scenes, because I do enjoy the abortion scene, for example, where once again he and Diane Keaton have a big fallout, and I just kind of wish they'd kept them separate and given us 2 90-minute sleek films that aren't just completely bogged down with.
Yeah.
And like we say, it's the fact there's no thematic link between the two. There's no purpose for them being cut together. It doesn't justify, like, they don't complement each other. They don't work as two halves of the same whole.
I think I didn't even see it as nicely as that, because the Vito story, for me, I didn't get very engaged with it. I don't like him. I don't like him as a character. He's not a nice person. He's just sort of manipulative. He doesn't give much character, so it's not like there's much to like about him, even as a bad guy.
I don't know. I think as a young him, I think the young version is kind of... He's innocent enough for the most part that you can kind of buy this sense of he's trying to make the best of a bad situation for his family and looking after them, and I do kind of, to a point, sympathise with him, certainly more than anyone in the first film.
There is the occasional little flourish, like there's the bit where he comes back from a day's work and he just like puts a pear on the table for his wife. And she comes in and she's like, "Oh, that's a lovely looking pear. That's really nice." And he's like, "Yeah."
And what about Michael's story then? So they tie it in with this sort of huge event, which is the Cuban Revolution, and that is very much based in reality. You know, there was a big mob presence in Cuba. It's one of the things that was sparked the revolution. Yeah, so it's all very much tied into this reality. And I think in 1974 that would have been a bit more relevant. Like, people would have known that Cuban Missile Crisis was like less than 10 years before, and all that sort of thing. I think we're losing a little bit on that just because we're not as culturally close to it.
Well, that was it. I felt like it was relying on me knowing what was coming about the whole Cuba thing. Like, I know about the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I'll be honest, I didn't know the exact dates of the Cuban Revolution. I didn't know how it went down necessarily, beyond there was one. So when Michael's talking about his, business dealings with this other guy, what's his name, Roth?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Hyman Roth.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's saying, I don't think I'm going to invest in you, actually. I think these rebels might be onto something. And then, obviously, they, take over.
And there's some nice moments in it. And, Lee Strasberg is really great. That's interesting. That's interesting to see him. And he's playing a character that's sort of based on a real person. So there's a lot of sort of truth to it. But what's the actual journey? It's Michael's emotional journey, which is what's important, really, is that he's just slowly deadening himself to the world around, and like the ultimate being he kills his brother. That's the ultimate sort of, that's the where he and it's the end of the film, really, isn't it? But it's the switch from a hard, cold-blooded killer to killing blood, and it's different. It's a big step.
It's how they kind of drag it out, though, because he realizes that Fredo is the one that tried to have him killed, and then they sort of go away and they're separate for a couple of years, maybe. And Michael says, well, I'm not going to kill him while Mum's alive. And then Mum dies, and then he has him killed.
But wouldn't it have been great if you had this tense thing where he knows that his brother has betrayed him, but he can't do anything about him, and he can't tell anyone, and he has to live with him, and he has to watch his kids play with him, and his feeling is this betrayal. But then he thinks, but he is my brother, and he is just like... He's a sap, and and when they have that, they do have that kind of scene, and you understand his motivations for why he did what he did. You understand he was taken advantage of by people who were using him. There was no real intent behind it, but Michael has to make this decision. Well, no, you still have to pay the price, and that scene is great. But like, I wanted more of that. Like, let's see Fredo living with the family and having to work, and he's having to like, rather than just avoiding him all the time.
Yeah, completely agree. And then the film ends with a strange flashback sequence that I wasn't expecting, with James Caan coming back to reprise the role from the first film. There's like a birthday scene.
And I guess it's harking back to innocence, really, isn't it? That's the sort of... It's a moment of him just looking back.
Because now out of the Corleone kids, there's really only Michael and Connie, his sister, and that's about it. And she has quite a few scenes in this film, actually. She's a sort of destructive character, and the actress was nominated for an Oscar for this particular film, so probably deserves some recognition. It helps, I guess she is the director's sister as well, so I suppose that if you're the director's sister, you get a better role in the sequel.
What about his daughter?
That leads us on to God 3 Arthur.
Just before we get there, I just want to. Did you know that Marlon Brando was supposed to come back for this flashback sequence at the end of the
really?
end of the film? Yes, and he'd agreed to return.
He wanted $5 million.
Well, no. Apparently, he felt mistreated by the board at Paramount for some reason that wasn't apparent in my research. So he just didn't turn up for the. He was only supposed to be on set for one day, and he just didn't turn up.
Brando.
So Coppola had to rewrite the scene on that day.
Just cut the scene.
It is very unnecessary, isn't it? I don't know. I suppose it is. It's like what Alan said. It's Michael harking back to more innocent times.
You just cut the film an hour and a half earlier, to be honest, and call it a day.
Okay, so I guess we need to move on to Godfather Part 3.
Yes.
So it was a cash grab. There's no pretense about that. There was no hiding of it. It was pretty much that was its appeal.
Kind of astonished hearing that. Is Coppola like really open about that as well? Has he admitted that?
I don't know. Certainly other people have been, because the reason Robert Duvall wasn't in it was because he asked for too much money and they wouldn't refuse to pay it. And when people questioned that, were like, "Oh, you should have done it. Like, it's The Godfather. You know, it's one of your most famous roles." He was like, "They were doing it for the money, so don't come at me saying I like."
That's interesting. I wondered why he wasn't in this.
This is often looked back on as this complete trilogy and this 3-part story, but do bear in mind this was made like 20 years after the first two.
Mm-hmm.
So it really was a kind of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull situation. It was just like they're going back to the well.
But I do like it because they push it even further into the future actually. But they make him like, now he's older, now he has to deal with different things. And I like that. I like the concept. Whereas Indiana Jones is just like, he's 70 now, but he still does exactly the same things.
Well, he had a dodgy hip, didn't he? Or did I imagine that? Maybe he didn't.
No, I don't think he did.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a really controversial opinion here, I guess.
Are you going to say you like this film?
It's your favourite of the three.
Yeah.
I mean, if
it's not my favourite of the three, because I would take the bits I like from the second film above this, but in terms of which is the most coherent, best crafted film, I think this is the best film of the three in terms of how it's put together, the story they're trying to tell. This is a coherent, relatively well structured, compared to the other two, narrative. It follows a simple through line. It doesn't particularly lose track of what it's trying to do, and I think it does it fine.
I think this would be my favourite were it not for the ruinous performance of Sofia Coppola in a very important role.
Now, do you think there was maybe a little bit of nepotism at play?
No, I don't know.
Just a theory.
It was just an
I've
open
got.
casting. She happened to be the best. That was.
Do you think there was a bit of nepotism behind Carmine Coppola being the composer for this one as well?
Or Nicolas Cage turning up in his films and stuff like that.
Why isn't Nicolas Cage in these films?
Because he was too busy being Nicolas Cage.
Can we all lay into Sofia Coppola now?
Oh God, her performance is phenomenally bad. To the point that I can't watch the scenes without questioning how angry Al Pacino must have been that's what he was put up against to work with. And it makes me think more of him as an actor, that he does as good a job as he does with her. Because he's given nothing to work with from her.
It was supposed to be Winona Ryder. She was cast. It was all going through. And basically, she dropped out at the last minute to go and do Edward Scissorhands.
Good choice.
And
yes,
yeah, so Sofia Coppola was drafted in as a kind of last minute replacement, and like nobody thought it was a good idea except Francis Ford Coppola, it seems. And well, yeah, I mean that was borne out, and then. After it was shown to test audiences and she was completely derided, they ADR'd some of her dialogue. So they tried to kind of re-perform it in a better way. So obviously that didn't work.
You mean we're watching the improved version?
Yes.
Jesus.
Her delivery's so lifeless with everything. It's, oh my god, it's so weird.
Well, I think the redubbing of the dialogue was because she basically has a Valley Girl accent, and so they were trying to cover up where that sort of popped out too much.
Isn't it weird that Francis Ford Coppola like cast his daughter in such a highly sexualized role? Like she's I did think that in the when she's like rolling bits of dough with Andy Garcia, and it's like you've got to do this. You're doing this. That's really gross. That's it because everything she does in this film is sort of meant to be kind of seductive. You know, it's just kind of odd to watch it, knowing that the dad is the one in charge of putting it together from that point of view. It's very odd.
Any kind of sensuality was ruined for me by the fact that it's effectively cousins that are romancing each other. It's
there's that as well.
Weird.
Yeah.
And that's not like something you have to put together. That's the big problem of the relationship.
Yeah.
Everyone keeps saying, like, will you stop shagging your cousin?
It's quite, yeah.
I love the arc in this one. The whole idea that, you know, Pacino is trying to make it as a straight guy who's gotten out of this business and he's pulled back in, as he says, and obviously that is a theme that's explored in the earlier films, but again I just feel like it's done properly here. They actually kind of focus on it long enough to do it.
I like there's the idea of an older man having to look back on his life and like dealing with the consequences of what he's done, like that people have died because of him, and I like that.
We've spoken about this in an earlier episode about how I seem to have a thing for aging up characters and having them deal with what they are as old men. And I think I spoke about how the only version of Bruce Wayne as opposed to Batman that I find compelling is one from Batman Beyond, when he's an old man and he can't quite do what he does anymore. And I think that's part of what I like here. I like seeing the character as an old man trying to make amends for his actions in life and come to terms with what he is.
But even this is corrupted because he's making amends. He's giving money to good causes and things like that. He's trying to like, he's putting things into religion. He's putting his kind of faith in the afterlife because he's fucked up the real life. But even that is tied in with some very nefarious business dealings that's going on, and ends up with like slaughtering people and killing the Pope, in fact.
That's it. I like that, you know, his best attempts are still very dark and not quite... It's a good bit of conflict for me, that. I like that.
And just like the first film, this is tying into real events at the Vatican. When John Paul I became Pope, he was Pope for about 30 days and then he died. And there's a lot of rumour about was he actually killed because he came into power and was suddenly, saying, all right, we're not going to do that, we're not going to do that. And he was pissing off the wrong people. So it's one of these, like, all that is kind of speculation, but this is very much tying into that and giving a reason for what happened. Obviously, the Vatican is up to all sorts of dodginess, so so I quite like that it ties into that and this reality behind it.
I like that element in this one, and also this is the most Al Pacino-y of the lot. It's the film where he's really given a chance to just like do what he does, and again I like that. I love Al Pacino.
So what about the bit where they've realised they're an hour into the film and they realise that there's not really anything too dramatic happening, so they have a helicopter fly up and kill everybody.
I love that scene.
Nice and subtle, isn't it?
It's an interesting scene. I admit it kind of feels completely tonally out of place with everything that's happened up until then, but it's more interesting than pretty much anything that's happened in the franchise up until that point, so I'm all for it.
It woke me up.
It's a good scene.
That and Andy Garcia biting off that guy's ear or whatever he did, that was another one that made me sit up.
But the story that really does kind of, it becomes about Andy Garcia's character, which is, and again, it kind of feels like we lose a bit of focus on like what we're actually telling with this story. And obviously he's supposed to be similar to Michael, but he's not the same character.
I really like their relationship, and I like that he's this kind of like the whole like, what the fuck do I do with this problem child? I'm trying to accept him because family is important to me and everything, but he's fucking shit up for me. He's causing me real trouble. He's that boy ain't right.
but also he's not he's not like Michael was, because he's not like this innocent who gets drawn into the family. He's like, come on, let me go kill some people. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
So
he's like itching to fuck shit up for them.
Yeah, so he's not seeing himself in him. He's trying to sort of save. He's trying to save him.
He's trying to hold his family together with this fucking wild card that he's forced to deal with. That's basically what it comes down to. This guy is introduced who's a kind of powder keg, and he clearly knows is going to cause him trouble, and does. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic, because he's sort of trying to mentor him, but it's kind of a futile effort, and I think he knows that. And the whole final sequence. Is there anything before this? Before I go into the ending?
Well, one thing I did want to just mention was, like, again, it's a bit like in the second film, but we have this girl. What is she supposed to be at 18? And she's got a crush on her cousin, and he's just like, he's just like, okay, I'll play along with it. She's quite pretty. I'll have a bit of that. She's my cousin, whatever. But it's like we're supposed to buy into it as this great romantic tragedy, this kind of star-crossed lovers that aren't allowed to be together, and it never works. I never buy into it.
No, never.
And but if it was played more like, okay, it is a teenage crush, and it's really important to her, but not to everyone else. But it is like everyone's talking as if they're legitimately going to like be getting married and stuff. It's like, what are we talking about? I just didn't buy into that at all, and it felt like that was an important part of the motivation. That I had
to be fair, I didn't buy into anything she did or said whatsoever. So, did Sofia Coppola want to be in this film, or was it like a really embarrassing, like, Dad, and she didn't want to be in it? And
she was very much like, I can't act. I'm not an actor or anything. So I think she was a bit, freaked. She was scared. She was terrified of it, basically.
Because I think she's certainly produced, as a writer and director, some very good work. I'm a big fan of some of her films, so she's she's clearly got some awareness of like how the world works. She and what is and isn't a good performance, I suppose, as well, because she's working with actors to produce good films and stuff. So. Yeah. But yeah, she is one of the worst performances I've ever seen in anything.
So it's horrible.
It's sub Tommy Wiseau, in fact.
No, it's not. Come on.
No, it is because Tommy Wiseau has got some weird semblance of like madcap energy about what he's doing, and that's what. And if you hear Tommy Wiseau day to day, like that weird. Bad acting delivery of his lines is how he talks. That's just how he is. Yeah. So
I met him the other day, so
himself quite well. More on that in a few weeks, I suppose.
Yeah.
So so possibly the most ruinous thing about the film is that the whole ending sequence is built around that character, that Sofia Coppola character, getting shot.
Yeah, but you don't need to buy her performance to buy that it's upsetting to Al Pacino.
Oh, no, I do. No. Because when she is shot and she falls down to her knees and she says, Dad, and then falls over, and then everyone else is like acting their tits off, like screaming and all this.
Well, I was going to say, Al Pacino, he's really bringing his A game in that scene.
He is going full Pacino there. And
I think
it's
he does
fantastic.
a good job.
It's a fantastic scene.
I was laughing all the way through. I couldn't...
Oh, no, he's great.
I thought it was hilarious, the whole thing. I probably would have been alright with it more had it not been for Sophia. Maybe I would have been more into it and bought the over-the-top camp that Al Pacino's doing, but
I bought it well enough to... I think Al Pacino's great, and I think he kind of sells it. He does his part of... That was my note. I'm flabbergasted at how well he acts opposite her consistently throughout the film, and I guess he is just a master of his craft.
Oh, he's a great actor, don't get me wrong, and I don't think it's his fault. I think, honestly, if he'd have done this exact same thing and the actress that died was better and delivered that last word with some sense of skill, I probably would have been really behind this.
Well, I don't know what that last word's meant to convey. That's the problem with that. I don't know what emotion we're meant to take from it, because it's flat and emotionless. She says the word Dad, and I don't know what that is. She meant to be shocked, sad? She doesn't understand what's happening, betrayed, but like what are we meant to be taking from it?
She's She's saying it's her like appeal for help. It's like what does a child does in trouble? They run to their father. That's what she's doing, and he's powerless to help. And not only is he powerless to help, but he's at least partly responsible for it. And it breaks his heart, and it completely destroys him inside.
It almost comes across as if she doesn't even register that she's been shot, and she's trying to continue. And then
that's kind of how I took it. Yeah.
But I don't know how.
I mean, I'm putting that meaning onto it as how I would like it to mean. I'm not sure how she was doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
That whole finale sequence, though, them at the opera, I like all of that. I really like that whole sequence of the people sneaking around, setting up these assassinations.
I liked it, but they really dragged it out. I was so bored by the end.
Well, I could say that about the entire franchise, to be honest, but like compared to the other scenes in this series, that's one of my favorite things overall.
Oh yeah, I really liked
certainly
it.
Most entertaining, most just well crafted. I don't think I do find it that boring, the theatre stuff. I think I find it quite.
It just went on too long for me. I was sick of it.
There are some nice little things going on, like there's what's her name, the sister, Michael's sister, is given that poisoned cannoli to Eli Wallach, and she's just like watching him, and you don't know that it's poisoned, and she just keeps looking at him, and you're thinking like something's gonna happen. And then there's the assassination attempt. They're trying to set up a sniper at the other side of the thing to shoot Michael, and there's something going on there. There's enough going on and it's all piling up on top of each other that I get really into it, and I don't know how it's going to end. But then we have the very last scene of the whole trilogy, which is Michael, in terrible old age makeup, sitting in a chair, and then he sort of slumps and is still, and then like throws himself off the chair onto the ground and presumably dies. I was stitches. I had tears rolling down my face. I thought it was the funniest thing. It's so bad.
Well,
again, why would you include that? Why wouldn't you just cut the film? Like,
yeah,
it felt like
we don't need to know that. Oh yeah, and 20 years later he died. We don't see anything of him. We don't see like, oh, he's lived in complete heartache since that time, or he remarried actually and then moved to Sicily and had another family. Like we don't know anything about it, so it's kind of meaningless.
Yeah.
Except like, oh, and then he died later.
Yeah.
It's. I guess he's alone. Maybe that's supposed to mean something. He died alone.
But it doesn't mean anything, like, in that context. It's like, maybe he was alone for those 5 minutes. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, maybe
and then his grandson comes running up with a spray can.
He did have...
papers.
He had some kind of... did he have an orange on him when he fell over? I remember there was some thing that, like, bounced along. I don't know if it was an apple or what.
People often point to this series as, you know, an example of artistic integrity and all that, and blah 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 blah. But they were going to make a fourth one.
Yeah. Anyone know much about that?
Well, I believe it basically didn't happen because the author of the books that had been working on the films very closely died before they had a chance to write anything. But it got so far as casting.
Wow.
The fourth film, and Leonardo DiCaprio was cast as a young Sonny Corleone at one point.
Oh, the James Caan character.
And Robert De Niro was meant to be reprising his role, along with Andy Garcia and what is it? Talia Shire? Is that how you say it? Talia?
Oh,
Talia Shire. In fact, I'm reading here. Robert Duvall was meant to be coming back as well.
He died, didn't he?
Well, yeah, but when was it going to be set? Presumably flashing all over the shop, I would have thought. And Al Pacino was going to have a little cameo at the end, apparently. Again, I assume before he dies.
Or maybe he didn't die and he's like going to stand up and be like, oh,
yeah,
that was a funny turn.
Yeah. So, I mean, it got quite far along. You know, I think work had begun on the script and everything. It's just that the guy died and they thought...
Mario Puzo.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I don't think anyone would give Coppola the money to do it.
I think if Coppola said, I want to make The Godfather Part 4, they would let him do it. People would be foolish not to fund that. It would make money.
Yeah, that's true.
I think a lot of people would be like, oh, they can't let anything be, blah, blah, blah. But again, they'd be completely overlooking the fact that the third one came 20 years after the first two and that sort of thing. Although they probably then say, the third one's shit. Me.
It was still nominated for a fucking load of Oscars. It was nominated for Best Picture and Best Director.
Like I say, I'm doubling down on this opinion. I'm sticking with it. I think the third one is objectively the best of the three, the best made film, and on a subjective level, I certainly enjoy it a hell of a lot more than the first one.
It's my favourite of the three. I don't know if I'd go as far to call it the best made, constructed. I found I was laughing more throughout the whole thing, and I enjoyed the Michael and Kay scenes.
But I mean, I'll admit some of it is unintentionally funny because Al Pacino does chew the scenery, but you get that in all of them. It's unintentionally funny in the first one when Marlon Brando died. In fact, everything with Marlon Brando is unintentionally funny.
Yes, it's true.
The bit with the horse's head is unintentionally funny because it looks so shit. The bit when they get gunned down and they're just being shot for like 10 years is really funny because it goes on so long. It's like Sideshow Bob stepping on rakes.
Alan, where do you stand on the third one when comparing it to the other ones? You're not a fan of the second one?
I prefer the first one. I just find it more appealing. But I agree that the structure of this one is probably the sanest. But it just didn't engage me enough. I was bored for quite a lot of it. And yeah, I just didn't care about the characters really. Whereas in the first one, I was much more engaged. And the second one, I kind of like elements of it. I just think it's quite a badly put together film.
There we go. We've done it, guys. You can stop now.
Should we do our ratings for them just to sort of round that out? My ratings go 8.66.
Oh,
ooh,
high
that's
praise.
surprisingly positive.
Well, like I say, I think I'm slagging them off quite a lot because they're so highly reputed. I feel like I need to redress the balance somewhat. But there are obviously, we have talked about a lot of elements that I really like about them. The acting, I think, is superb, and for most of it, and a lot of the story elements really work. I just think they just don't work as complete films very well.
All right, I will go 5.77.
I think I will go 5.67. I think
I was so close to 6 for the second one.
It's hard because I think the second one is a better film than the third one, but the third one was the most enjoyable to watch.
Like I say, I think if a good editor took the second film, they could make an 8 out of 10 film for me, easy, out of what they've got there. It's just it's bogged down with all this nonsense that doesn't need to be there and takes away from it.
Do you like The Godfather? Let us know why.
Yes. We've ripped apart one of the most loved films of all time.
Yeah, specifically, actually, if you do get in touch telling us why you like it, could you please have a better argument than, oh, you just don't get it, or you're too young, or you need to watch it again? Because that's the argument that I come up against. Like, no one ever articulates a good reason why it's good. I don't,
Yeah.
I feel like it's one of those things where people think they have to say that it's amazing and brilliant, and it's actually not.
Genuinely, yeah. Like you say, if any listeners take umbrage to that, please do come and talk to us because we genuinely would like to hear some opinions from people who want to try and explain why these are good films. Because as Calvin says, it's difficult to put a negative opinion out there without being met by people just telling you to shut up and fuck off
and come back next week for more of the same.
Yeah. So they're obviously not above making a fourth one. Do you think they ever will? Do you think they'll ever touch The Godfather again?
I can't imagine. Not now.
No.
You don't think Sofia Coppola might take a stab at it when Francis dies or something?
Oh no, I don't think she'd have. I think it'd have to come from Francis and Al Pacino or Randy Garcia or Diane Keaton, and probably have to be involved.
What about Nicolas Cage? When the Coppola dynasty is like mostly gone.
They really are a dynasty, aren't they? It's sort of,
Let's imagine Francis hears your little rant there, Calvin, and he goes, "All right, Calvin, you think you're hot shit, do you? Let's see your fucking take on Godfather Part 4, you fucking piece of work."
Certainly, Mr. Coppola. Or Mr. Ford Coppola. Anyway, yeah, well, basically what I want to do is, I want to do a mature romance comedy starring Al Pacino and Diane Keaton. We're gonna either ignore the ending of the third one, or just, we can open the film in modern day and Al Pacino is like, oh, do you remember when I fell off that chair that time and you all thought I was dead? Well, here we are. So Michael Corleone is alive, and we open the film as every Godfather film does, with a wedding. But this time, it's a same-sex wedding between Anthony Corleone and his partner. Now, obviously, we get all the surviving cast of the previous films back, but our main focus is on Michael Corleone and Kay Adams. Now, Kay's husband...
wait a minute. Is this... Just to clarify. Is this set now? Is this a contemporary film?
Yes.
So how old? so bear in mind, the character of Michael was born in 1920. So he's 97 years old. His gay son is about 69 and getting married to his partner.
I reckon Al Pacino would be up for playing a 97-year-old version of that character. I think that sounds right up his alley.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Kay's husband has left her because after the events of Godfather 3, wouldn't you? Like, if you were going to be involved in this kind of dreadful family. But Kay and Michael are civil enough with each other, and Talia Shire as Connie Corleone is back too. Now, we can get lots of comedy in here as Michael encounters members of the gay mafia. He thinks they're all just like lobbyists and article writers and campaigners and that sort of thing, but it turns out they're actually just like the real mafia and, you know, bumping people off and all that kind of stuff. Now, the head of the mafia is George Takei, who Michael gets talking to, and the pair get along fine, and George introduces Michael to his husband. The pair are really adorable together, and Michael gets jealous. He has a heart-to-heart with George and tells him that he never really got over Kay and wants to woo her back, but she'll never accept him while he's working in the mafia still. George says, "Psh, do you think my husband knows what I really do? You've just got to, you know, try and convince her that you've given it up, but keep it a secret. Have your cannoli and eat it too. Or your rainbow wedding cake," Al Pacino will say.
Do it in a George Takei voice.
"Have your cannoli and eat it too."
Quite good.
Thank you. So this instigates the bulk of the film, which involves various comedy hijinks of Michael dating Kay, but having to do mafia things at the same time. So, for example, they go for a date in a fancy restaurant, but Michael finds out it's also the same restaurant where he has to kill a guy that same night. Oh my god, how does he do it? Like, they're having a lovely horse and coach ride through Central Park while Michael is, like, dodging assassination attempts and the like. You know, funny stuff. So there's 2 hours of that. And then,
it's just worth clarifying that they're both in their late 90s. So this
it's even more funny.
Yeah.
So anyway, so there's 2 hours of that. And just before Act 3, Michael convinces his sister to go and meet Kay for a girls-only, you know, coffee or whatever, because he's not quite getting good vibes back from Kay. It's like they're having nice dates, but it's not really leading to anything more, and he feels that a bit of girl chat might reveal something. So Connie goes in, and she has a wire on, and it turns out, through this conversation, Kay's being very open, that Kay is actually playing the field. She downloaded an app called Tinster, which is Tinder for spinsters into gangsters. And Connie is stunned. "But I thought you hated the mafia life," she asks, and Kay confesses that in her old age she's come to accept that she actually has a bit of a thing for it, and is coming to a time where it's coming to a time where she needs to pick which of her potential suitors she's going to be with, because she's been dating several men at the same time. Now, because every Godfather film ends in a massacre, that's what we have here, where Michael goes away and kills all of Kay's potential suitors in a huge coordinated hit. But he realizes that this might look very suspicious if they all just disappear out of nowhere and don't get in touch with her. So he has to facilitate a way for the suitors to break up with her once they're dead. So he does things, for example, for one of them, he like forges a breakup note in his handwriting and like puts it under Kay's door, and for another one, he skins the guy and wears his skin. A sort of bodysuit, and dumps Kay while impersonating this guy. Sorry.
I'm speechless.
I got my own thing. But it has to be from sort of far away, because if she's close up, she'll realise that something's up. And, not go along with it, maybe. And after all this, Kay decides she wants to get back with him, so they get back together, and that's the end.
Cool.
So did Saul fall off his chair?
My idea is to do a TV show set in the 30s called The Corleones, which is basically it's the prequel to Godfather films and a sort of spiritual successor to The Sopranos. It's basically just The Sopranos in the 30s, but with the Corleone family. Obviously, we'll establish Vito as he's like now the Don of the family, and the story will kind of focus on his children more, though. I think that'd be more interesting. So we'll have him as just the sort of the control, like the status quo. But so we'll time it so that we've got a teenage Sonny as the principal character, or kind of the one we focus on mostly, who's kind of coming up in the organisation. So we'll see him like maybe 18, 19, he's just getting involved and he's doing these first crimes, and then like Tom Hagen has to help him out of like stuff, like because he gets into trouble, then Tom Hagen helps him out, and we could see Tom gets sent off to law school because he's the smart one, and maybe Sonny's like a bit jealous of that at first, but then he kind of gets used to it. He goes to visit him at college, and then he sort of realizes it's just like a party atmosphere, and so he sets up like a gambling ring with all these rich law students at uni. I'm just throwing out like plot ideas that could kind of, and then you've got. And then you've got like Fredo, who'll be slightly younger. He's trying to tag along with his older brother, but he's like every time they try to give him a job to do, he fucks it up. He's like the stupid one. And he's like really creepy with women as well. And he's like in a kind of teenage boy sense. And then, of course, you'll have young Michael as well. So he'd be about maybe 13, something like that. And so his sort of story arc over the whole thing would be like trying to keep up with his brothers at first. And then sort of he'll see something that's kind of makes him balk. And it's like, oh my God, this is kind of really immoral. And so we set him on that path of, okay, I don't want to be part of this. And so that's it, really. I just thought I'd scope out those few sort of major characters. But yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with The Sopranos, you would have it as like, there's a lot of characters there. You'd have a much bigger kind of arc. But the overall arc, I think you stick it with Sonny, because he'd be the interesting one to stick with in terms of the age group.
Well, The Sopranos is brilliant.
Anyway, go on, Sol.
All right, I've got two.
Do you want to smash them together in a badly handled...
yeah, maybe I should.
It doesn't matter if they don't fit.
But they're not particularly good ideas, so I'm hoping that having two will make up for the lack of quality.
Okay.
My first idea is, wouldn't it be good if it was like Blackadder and we did the Corleone family in ancient Rome, and you have Michael Corleone as a descendant of Gaius Cassius Longinus, if I'm saying that correctly. He's one of the men who murdered Julius Caesar, who in this version is portrayed by...
I think it's Gaius, not Gaius. It just gives it a different feel.
And I think Julius Caesar could be portrayed by CGI Marlon Brando.
Okay.
Yep, brilliant.
Just to get him in there. I think that'd work. Eating his grapes, being fanned on the throne. He'd be up for that. So that's one idea.
Okay.
And so that's intercut with this, which is my second idea. So like the franchise, it's basically one big family drama, right? That's all it is.
Yeah.
Just people whining at people and big family get-togethers, and they go wrong. So this film is a Corleone Thanksgiving, and everyone's coming to Al Pacino's house for the holidays, but there's loads of family tension and drama. So you've got Al Pacino there getting stressed out because he's trying to time the turkey, but he also doesn't want to miss the American football that's on.
Burning the yams!
Yeah, because he's got because he's got some money riding on it, and then you've got all these other family members coming. You've got a couple with the relationship falling apart, just taking like little snappy digs at each other. You've got your like Trump voting older guy versus the young liberal hippie character, so they're like blowing up at each other. You've got your gay kid who's not really properly being accepted into the family yet, but it's a bit tense surrounding that. There's the one who gets a bit too drunk, and the dinner's ruined because Al Pacino can't cook. so it's a nice sleek 80 minutes of family drama, tension, and it comes to a head as Al cuts into the turkey on the table and sees that it's still frozen inside, and he screams "Rah!" and throws the turkey into the fire, and then storms into the kitchen. And everyone gasps as they watch through the little kitchen hatch. And he starts grabbing bowls and eggs and a whisk. And they say, "What are you doing, Don Michael?" And he goes, "I'm going to make you an omelette you can't refuse."
Oh, God.
Good night, everybody. That's been Diminishing Returns.
Well done. Hope you're very proud of yourself.
Wow, that was the Godfather Trilogy, Parts 1 and 3, and Toy in the Mill. I hope you enjoyed. If you did enjoy it, go on to www.returns.com and go to your friends, tell them, why come to us? What have we done to deserve such generosity? We'll make you know when you get reviewed. Those new podcasts, Diminishing Returns, alright? Let's go. We talking about something. We're doing another film. The Cons magazine. It wasn't time like Tears in the Rain.